Libertarian Counterpoint. I'm Richard Fields. On the program today, Tim Snowball from Pacific Legal Foundation, attorney there, and Sacramento physician. Lee Welter, welcome to the show. We're at www.accesssacramento.org on channel 17 in Sacramento on YouTube, and thanks to Tim, we're on Facebook. So welcome to the show, and however you're watching, tell your friends. Donald J. Trump, libertarian or opposite?
My confession and a proposal. First, I voted for Gary Johnson.
Of course.
Being pragmatic.
We have
in California, we're under the thumb of the Democrat Party. And doesn't matter, in a sense, how we vote if we're not voting for the Democrats. And I voted for Gary Johnson, a very good libertarian and a good candidate. But I confess, I slept much better knowing that the despicable candidate had been defeated. I'm sure not everybody agrees with that, but to learn what you need to learn.
Yeah, I mean that's a question. Would Hillary have been worse? And of course, that's the question. That's the question that Democrats use against Republicans, and Republicans use against Democrats ad nauseum. The lesser of two evils.
Yes.
That's the argument. And in close states, which California is not, but in Ohio or states where the vote is closer, that's what is used to bring libertarian-leaning Democrats or Republicans into the fold.
Yes.
That's the only thing, because there's no reason to vote for either a Trump or a Hillary.
But it's an interesting thing, I think, when you look at all the pushback that Trump has gotten, and people seem pretty convinced, because of his kind of unorthodox approach. Some of the things that have happened in the first year. Well, he's on his way out. You know what I mean? We can kind of nominate anyone here on the Democratic side, and he's going to lose. But I mean, modern political science would disagree, right? And so, if I'm trying to recall stuff from college, I think that they say, well, here's how you predict whether someone will be reelected a president. Are they an incumbent? If they're an incumbent, they have an advantage naturally because people don't want to change it up. Two, how's the economy doing? If the economy is doing well, people are usually vote with their wallets. If things are going well, they're less likely to change things up. And three, good old-fashioned party ID. There are people who identify with either party and
blue dog or red dog, yellow dog Democrats.
Vote that way. Vote that way, no matter what. And so I think that we'll see how the next 3 years go. But some of these early predictions, I think, might be a little unwarranted.
The question about whether he's libertarian or not is
certainly not.
Yeah.
No. In fact,
caveat: there are a couple of places where he has been somewhat libertarian. He never really campaigned particularly hard on. Well, he did, I guess. He said, "I'll do a better job with the Supreme Court than Hillary will." And I think Gorsuch was a decent nomination. I think other nominees to the federal bench have been quite good. On balance, not perfect, but quite good. Would you agree from a legal standpoint?
I think so, and I think it's important to parse out kind of. Will people have an idea of a judge will do X or Y, and I support X and I don't like Y, therefore I like this judge. It shouldn't be, I think, about endpoint, whether a judge is going to kind of rule the way that you would prefer. The question is, will a judge be loyal to the text of the Constitution? Are they going to sit on their hands when they're supposed to sit on their hands, or are they going to step up and be the protectors of natural rights and individual rights as intended? So on the one hand, you've got Gorsuch as part of the wing of the court, I think, that is focused on the text of the Constitution. That's why I prefer that side of the court. The other side, I think, acts sometimes as kind of a super legislature, kind of imposing their politics on the populace through the guise of the court, and I don't like that, and I don't think that.
And Gorsuch tends to be an originalist, tends to be a true interpreter of the Constitution.
Correct.
As do some of the lower bench appointees.
Correct.
Okay, so that's one place where we can say, reasonably good job. Another place of good short-term importance is the regulatory state. Scott Pruitt as head of EPA and some of the other regulatory agency appointees, I think, have been, some of them, not all of them, some of them have been good. Would you agree with that?
I think so, and I think that a lot of the time, especially in the modern media, people are arguing over who said what or where or who tweeted what today. And I understand that the news cycle, the way it works, is a business and has to generate interest, and that kind of gets people to stay on CNN. But when you look at what's going on in the country today, the modern regulatory state is probably the most dangerous threat to liberty out of anything we could possibly imagine. I mean, there are so many federal agencies now. Even experts don't know how many there are. They're operating, without democratic oversight, with impunity, and making rules that have the force of law. So I think any administration, whether it be Donald Trump or anyone else, I'm definitely happy with any kind of rollback of the administrative state that doesn't require me going to court.
The problem, of course, is that he's doing it all through executive order. He's doing it all in a way which will be reversed day one of the next Democratic administration, which will come sooner or later.
Yes, in addition, as a pragmatic businessman, he's been cozy with the Democrats when it paid off for him, and he'll be cozy with big government Republicans if it has a payoff for him.
Sure, I think he's either way kind of out there, or he's a political genius. I think that the history books will write that story. I think it's safe to say that he's not a libertarian.
Well, and where he's not a libertarian, and that is, I think, very obvious in two areas: foreign policy and the drug war. He campaigned somewhat libertarian on the drug war. He said, I'm in favor. I'm 100% in favor of medical marijuana. He said, I think we should leave recreational marijuana up to the states. Federal solution is not pure libertarian, repeal the drug laws, but it's a step in the right direction. Better than Obama, better than any of the predecessors. Gets elected, who does he appoint as Attorney General? A Nixon-style drug warrior, Jeff Sessions.
Right.
And what does he do on one of his first foreign policy jaunts? He goes to Asia and plays footsie with what's his name? Rodrigo Duterte, the president of the Philippines.
And now John Bolton.
The president of the Philippines is famous for having bragged that I killed a guy when I was 16. And, just over a look. He bragged about it.
Right.
Later said it was a joke, but I doubt it. He unquestionably is responsible for the extrajudicial execution of hundreds, if not thousands, of drug users as well as drug dealers. This is a guy who is an absolute menace to humanity because of his drug warrior, leave no stone unturned attitude. Jeff Sessions probably is an admirer of that approach. I mean, that's where his mindset comes from. And as soon as Donald Trump said, let's execute drug dealers, Jeff Sessions, right on cue, said, yeah, I think that's a good idea. We'll do everything we can to enforce the drug laws, and and use the death penalty where appropriate.
This leads
this is scary stuff.
This leads to my proposal. Thomas Jefferson warned us, a poorly educated society will not remain free. And who could argue that our education system has improved over the past century? Certainly has not. An educated populace will agree with us that decent candidates will have these characteristics. They'll truly understand, protect, and defend our Declaration of Independence and our Constitution. That's number one. Number two, serve as a fiduciary. Who understands what that means? None of them, unfortunately.
Let's talk about fiduciary.
Who truly understands economics. Such a candidate would recognize that our war on drugs has been rewarding criminals and punishing their victims since 1937. They'd also see the Federal Reserve as a corrupt enterprise and would treat increasing debt and unfunded liabilities as a path to destruction. Only Krugman fans believe we can spend our way into prosperity at the same time we're borrowing way out of debt.
No.
Well, and speaking of borrowing, ridiculous amounts of money, the budget reconciliation bill that finally passed was a giveaway to the Democrats. I mean, they increased defense spending when we're already spending more than the next 9 countries combined.
Right.
Unnecessary.
Right.
Ridiculous on its face, but Republicans' constituencies, military-industrial complex, love that spending. And at the same time, that was something like $80 billion in increased spending and another $64 billion in increased spending for all of the favorite social Democrat programs that keep Nancy Pelosi and Chucky Schumer happy. So the compromise was, well, we'll just increase the debt so we can both have our goodie bag filled up to the top.
Right.
That's the kind of budget that was increased, or the budget proposal that was signed off on by Donald Trump after he called it ridiculous in a tweet. I mean, he said, this is ridiculous. and signed it anyway.
Well, I just wonder, you know, I've debated some people before and talked about how you would solve this kind of problem. It strikes me that elected officials are always going to be incentivized, right, under basic kind of public choice approach. They're always going to be incentivized to try to get goodies and to try to do, you know, barrel rolling for their own district, right? So what is the way, I wonder, that we tamp down on that without so tying the hands of the legislature in case there is something that happens and you know, massive amount of money has to be spent for whatever reason, whether it be an armed conflict that we get involved in, assuming that we're not in perpetual war. How that happens through the like a balanced budget amendment? Would that be something that?
Well, you know, that's a good question,
Yeah.
but Trump didn't answer it. I mean, he's assigned us
Right.
with the tax cut and the spending increases to $1 trillion per year
Right.
deficit, as far as the eye can see. And you know, when you talk trillion here and trillion there, it doesn't sound like, you know, who understands that number? Well, it's over $3,000 for every man, woman, and child in the
Right.
country. That's how much $1 trillion deficit is.
Right.
That's how much is being put on every citizen's credit card, never to be paid back, or
Right.
at least not in the foreseeable future.
Well, I wonder if the representatives even, if these numbers are even, if they
I don't
crosses
think,
their
well,
mind.
A,
It's like
they don't, as you mentioned
Right.
earlier, they don't read the bills.
Right.
So and B, I don't think they understand the economics of it.
It's just it's like getting a credit card and kind of spending money on a credit card.
And of course,
not-
I mean, we spent the elephant in the room is the transfer payments, the Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, all that. That's 70% of spending, along
Right.
with interest on the debt. But another, was it 30% or about 18% of the budget is the military budget.
right.
And 9 times what any other country, or more than the 9 next largest spending countries, you know, China, Russia, Britain, Israel, the 9 next highest spending countries, they don't spend as much as we do,
Sure.
combined.
Sure.
We don't need to spend that kind of money.
Right.
The only reason we're spending it is because we have a proclivity to keep Lockheed and
Right.
Grumman and Boeing all happy,
Sure.
funding our involvement in other
Right.
people's civil wars,
No, and I think
where
that,
we have no business.
right, and you look at a person like a John Bolton, right, from kind of the old school kind of neoconservative approach
John-
to neopolitics, and you know, since the end of the Cold War, you've had kind of a unipolar system, I think, as political scientists would say, saying that the United States has kind of been policing the globe, and it's just funny if you bring it back, compare the perpetual state of war now, and the spending and just the involvement overseas to one of the debates at the founding of the United States was whether or not they should have a standing army.
Yeah,
and
there you go.
the contention was why
No.
would we have a
We
standing
have
army?
2 moats. One is the Atlantic, the other is Pacific.
Which is why it's interesting when you look at something, not to get off topic, like the Second Amendment. The language used in the Second Amendment talks about having maintained militias in the states, with the idea being we're not going to have a standing army. So if something does happen suddenly, we need to call up the militia to be able to come up
Yeah.
and protect the borders.
And why has Switzerland never been invaded? Every able-bodied citizen is required to keep a fully automatic weapon in their home.
is that right? I didn't know that. Is that
Absolutely,
right?
Absolutely. They have never been invaded, probably never will. And it's not all just the elves.
Well, in short,
But the other problem, I mean, Mike Pompeo may have been good on economic issues as a congressman, but when it comes to militaristic issues, this is the guy that said that the Guantanamo needs to stay open, that NSA, the spying on every citizen by NSA is a good thing and should be continued. The guy that said that hero, Edward Snowden, the guy that unveiled all of the illegal NSA spying, that Snowden should be extradited back to the United States, given a fair trial, and then executed.
Well, assuming kind of assumes what's going to happen at the end of the trial. But.
He's also the guy that gave executive clemency or executive privilege to Gina Haspel for her not having to testify in the trial of the 2 people who put together what do you call it, the interrogation program that I forget the term, but basically torture.
Yeah.
Enhanced interrogation.
Right.
Enhanced interrogation. She was the person who supervised that
Right.
program. So what does Trump do? This is the guy that said, you know, I think we should probably during the campaign we should have withdraw money from NATO if they're not contributing, withdraw our support from NATO countries that aren't contributing. We should have a weaker hand, you know, not spend so much money in North Korea at the demilitarized zone. Well, first of all, he picks a fight, an insult match with Kim Jong-un,
Right.
which to no purpose.
Right.
Second, he is trying to pick fights with the Mexicans by sending the military to the border now.
Right.
This is a guy who is doing everything wrong when it comes to militarizing the country.
Right.
Increased defense budget. Mike Pompeo was Secretary of Defense now, and Gina Haspel, the person who was in charge of the intense interrogation, now head of CIA.
Right, right. No,
Not libertarian.
No. And I think that there's something, a concept they call the democratic peace that a lot of scholars talked about post the end of the Cold War, and they went, wow, like when you look at the world now, you've got more democratic countries at that point, more democratic countries,
Nice.
more free trade. But the thing is, that democratic peace was facilitated by policies that are run directly counter to what the president's trying to do now.
Yeah.
Tariffs, increased brinksmanship abroad.
I mean, to be fair, he promised to raise tariffs to get into trade wars. That was dumb when he proposed it, and it's even stupider now. It will do nothing but probably end up creating hot wars.
I think it was Murray Rothbard said, you don't have to know a lot about economics. He goes, I know it's kind of a dour subject sometimes, the technical subject. He goes, but if you don't know that much about economics, then you shouldn't be going around and spouting off about complex issues that you don't know about.
Yeah.
So, unfortunately, that might apply to the President of the United States, it looks like, but...
And to be fair, he does, and his proclivity to overspend, he does have experience in that area. Right. He is a past master at the art of bankruptcy, and that's probably where he's leading us. So I'm not sure. The Hillary would have been worse.
No, well, it's clear, regardless of how we debate the details, we have a spending problem, not a revenue problem. And there are people think otherwise. I don't understand how.
And another thing about Trump, I mean, he was, four square against in favor of the Second Amendment, standing strong with the NRA.
Right.
And now, after the Parkland shooting, said, "Well, maybe we should have some gun stock laws."
Right.
Other.
Well, it makes me wonder if he won't do or say anything to win.
I think that's
to win
without question.
And I think that if you are someone who's
including lie through his teeth.
Sure, no.
The Amazon deal proves that. I mean, this is a guy who says Amazon is using the post office as an errand boy.
Well, that's what they're supposed to do.
And it's costing taxpayers an arm and a leg. Anybody who has done any analysis of the post office knows that the post office loses money on first-class mail, sending letters to Bozeman, Montana, for the same price that they send them across town. It doesn't make any economic sense, never has, never will. They make money doing the last mile of Amazon package delivery.
Well, and when you look at like the popularity of a service like Amazon,
and he's been told that.
Yeah.
He's been told that
But the
multiple
market,
times.
The
It's
market,
been explained to him.
But the people,
economists have sat him down and explained it to him.
Right.
And he's still tweeting the same old BS.
Well, the people have spoken. A service like Amazon is extremely popular. And why are things popular in a market system? Because they're offering a quality service at affordable prices that people enjoy, right? So it's always interesting. You'll have people kind of on the left talk about the government as, the government's kind of benevolent or coming in and doing things for us, where the government is society. And then they look at a company like Amazon and they go, oh, that's coercive. They're forcing people into this. We need to break them up. They're far too large. You know what I mean?
Well,
when it's actually the exact opposite.
Yeah, in fairness to the people who, I'm not sure that any consumer actually dislikes Amazon because everybody seems to buy from them.
Right.
But Amazon, the business model never would have existed without Federal Reserve policy making it possible to borrow at 0% interest, because they run razor-thin margins, have from the beginning, never have returned a decent return on investment. So they're not funding their vast expansion through retained earnings. They're funding it through borrowing money at essentially 0%.
Smart business, right.
Makes sense from a business standpoint. Never would have worked without accommodated Federal Reserve policy.
My mind was wandering out to, if we privatized our communication system to replace the United States Postal Service, what would it be like? Be a
That
lot
would
like
be
the-
like.
Be a lot like the internet and email, wouldn't it?
Well, yeah, I mean, email's taken over first-class mail in
And
any
if
case.
somebody couldn't do that, they can always go to the internet store and say, "Oh, scan this and send it to Casper, Wyoming.
With the blockchain, anything's possible.
Oh, all right, fair enough.
Okay. Defensive gun use, does it save lives, or arms in the hands of civilians? Is that dangerous in the case of mass shootings, or is it helpful?
I have a simple comment or two. First of all, libertarians favor evidence and logic to counter what I call the emotional commie propaganda that favors victim disarmament. Gun control, that's a misleading statement. Victim disarmament is the real key. And historically, every nation that has gone totalitarian dictatorship has disarmed the public before they establish their hold on power. Every single one.
You stole my thunder. 20th century, Hitler, 21 million.
Yes.
Disarmed the Jews and everybody else he
Yes.
killed prior to sending them to the gas chambers.
Yes.
Stalin and Mao killed something like another
Many millions.
many more millions. Basically, democide, that's governments killing their own citizens. 169 million people killed by governments killing their own people in the 20th century. Mostly Hitler, Stalin, and Mao, but a few minor players like Pol Pot and Idi Amin and Pinochet and a few others. 64 million people killed in wars during the 20th century. World War I, World War II, Korean War, Vietnam War, etc. How many people were actually killed by, garden variety criminals, crime, neighbors shooting neighbors, armed burglary, armed robbery, that sort of thing? 8.5 million. Still a lot, way too many.
Right.
Yeah.
But 8.5 million compared to 169 or 64. The danger is not civilians who have arms. The danger is governments who have arms
Yes.
and criminals.
To
Sure.
elaborate on that last situation where an armed bystander has halted the activity of an active shooter, potential mass killer, the average number of deaths is 2.5. Where people wait for the police to arrive, as the saying goes, when seconds count, the police are only minutes away.
Right.
The
Or
average
they're
is
hiding
more
behind
than,
a car like in Parkland.
yeah, the average is more than 12.
Yeah.
So that's
Well,
5 times.
I mean, I've got a whole list here of.
Oh, you have it. Oh, you.
Yeah, a whole list
There's no
of
question.
examples, which I could read, but it's kind of beside the point. What your point is made, because whenever there are people in a school or in a movie theater or a shopping center or wherever, whenever there's an armed person there, the mass killer gets stopped really quickly. When there isn't an armed defender around, civilian or cop or otherwise, they have a shooting gallery, and
Yes.
they make sure to use a shooting, you take advantage of it. And psychotic killers go to shooting galleries.
Right.
They go to places where they know nobody can shoot back.
Yes.
That's why they pick nightclubs. That's why they pick schools. That's why they pick colleges. That's the reason.
And there's a really good satire. It's called Gun Free Zone. Have you seen it yet?
And I have not known.
Oh, it's worth reading. It's amusing.
Yeah, I mean,
That's the point.
I would be suspicious of any government policy proposed that will punish the collective for the sins of the individual, right? And there's no gun
Which is
crisis.
exactly what's happening.
There's no gun crisis in the United States. Gun violence in the United States is at a 30-year low. I don't think anyone wants there to be school shootings or any other, mass violence like this. But when you look at something like the Parkland, people, I'm all for them going out there and using their First Amendment rights to petition the government for changes they prefer. But I think overall, people participate in that kind of stuff because it feels good to have a cause, even if you don't know much about it, and even if you don't have an end goal in mind.
I agree with your support of the First Amendment, but I would say, having said that the what we call the mainstream media has been abusing their First Amendment rights. And let me give you an example of why. 2 examples. One, Sutherland Springs church shooting, stopped by an armed NRA-trained rifleman. Okay? That was, 27 people killed. And, mass shooting, but it was stopped. by an armed civilian. That story died within 2 or 3 weeks. 17 people killed at Parkland. That story has been going on for 3 months, at least. And that's a story where there was no cop, there was no civilian, nobody to shoot back. And that's why they're calling for gun control in a place where there were no defensive guns used. And the abuse, the lionizing of the kids, the whole media effort to say this is what we can use to put gun control over the top.
Right.
That's media who has their own viewpoint.
So
They are propagandists for
Yeah.
big government. There's little
Yeah.
doubt of it, especially since this last presidential campaign season. That's what they're trying to do.
And that's why I'm a fan of alternative media.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you is do you think that there should be a sharp line drawn at modern media, like a CNN, versus journalism in the classical sense? So my understanding of classical journalism was you report the facts.
Yeah,
you report the facts and you let the public decide.
Well, except that's never been the case, even
Right.
in the colonial
Or
era. Even in the colonial era, the newspapers were either one side or the other. They were even probably more partisan now than they are now. But when you have multiple sources of news, what Trump correctly calls fake news, I mean, you've got a lot of people out there on the internet, on Facebook, on Twitter, on blogs, blog posts, YouTube, wherever, that are putting out news that may or may not be credible, but it's certainly at least as credible in the aggregate as what is being put out by CBS, CNN, NBC, and ABC.
Speaking of news, this isn't truly news, but it's wisdom and insight. Tim has been kind enough to publish these on the website pacificlegal.org. Did I get that right?
You did.
And while there's still time, there are 7 articles, soon to be 10.
There will be 10. Yeah.
Okay. Number 1, government is not the source of our rights. We talked about this a little bit earlier. Number 2, government power must be limited. I love it. Part 3, individual rights trump government power. Sounds libertarian to me. Number 4, judges should do their jobs. Part 5.
Okay, just briefly, what is their job?
Yeah, but their job, the courts are designed, or at least their constitutional mandate is to be the protector of individual rights. And not
to enforce the Constitution.
And to enforce the Constitution to that end. And the entire purpose of the Constitution was not to empower the government, but to keep the government restrained in order to preserve the liberty of the individual.
So let's see if we can get a surge on your blogs on PLF. Thank you very much for being part of the show. See you again next week, same time, same place on the Libertarian Counterpoint, on YouTube, on Facebook, and elsewhere. Thank you.
Definitely. Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Richard.